In this video, I'm going to introduce to all of you how to start adding in textures and materials into your Unreal worlds. So what I've started out with here is I made 3 shapes here just for us to practice with. So you have your sphere geometry, we actually have the ground that we can also work with. We have a cylinder and we have a square. Before you actually dive in and begin working on and creating textures and materials in Unreal, one thing I'd strongly encourage you to do is to actually, in your content folder, make some sort of storage folder for all of your textures and materials. That way everything stays together and you're able to organize a little bit better. So what I did prior to the video here was I actually went out to Pixabay, I found grass. Now, placed it in the folder, told Unreal to import it. We've done this in previous videos. But what I'd like to talk about here a little bit is what you are seeing is when you import a graphic, it comes in as a texture. Now, whenever you're working with this though, textures are what go into materials. A texture is it's kind of just flat surface, and also you don't have a lot of control as far as working with either changing if you want it to look more metallic, if you want to have more of a shine to it, and so on. Materials, you work with material nodes that will enable you to go in and be able to actually make those sorts of edits. So just as a quick demonstration, when you click and drag a texture into an environment here, the environment is going to think a second, and you can see that down here in the bottom here, it generated a material for us here. This is one of the many ways that you can work with creating materials in Unreal. Unreal will not allow you to place a texture in your game environment. Instead, what it will do is it will convert it to a material to be placed on an object. Now, you also have a second option here where that was just pulling in a graphic. What if, for instance, I wanted to use the material and have maybe a solid color on one of my shapes here? What you can do is you can right-click in your content browser, and there is a material option. So I'll go ahead and click on that, and we'll call this first material. Now, notice the difference between grass mat and first material here. What you should see is notice that you have that checkerboard in first material. If I go ahead and double click on this, what this is going to open for us is we are going to now see the material editing window. This can be a pretty intimidating window to start out with. However, the core thing to remember here is this node right here. This is your result node. This node is what everything else, whenever you're building a material, plugs into, and this is pretty much what the user will see. You also do have your preview window over here on the side that, just as a side note, if you need to turn that off, you can turn off real time if you need to, as far as your computer is concerned. You can even go so far to turn off and just, change it to a wireframe mode if you need to. So first thing that I'm going to show you is changing the color on a material. To change of color, what you're going to want to work with is you're going to want to come over to the categories for the palette here. And we are looking at vector. More specifically, you want to choose the constant 3 vector. This will give you R, G, and B values that you can work with. So I'm going to click, hold, drag, and drop that into my work environment here. Here you can see that it has an orange border denoting that it has been highlighted. And down here under the material under constant, notice right now I have no color added, but I also have the RGB values there. I can double click to bring up my color picker and say OK. Unreal will record the color values for you. But if you notice, I'm still not seeing the color here on my material. That's because I haven't actually connected it into the material yet. So to connect to the material, I'm going to click and hold from that circle, and you'll see that you get a big bar or a line here that you can place. And you're going to want to add that to base color. You can see that you've done the connection correctly because of the check mark. Unreal will then refresh for a moment. And here you can now see my color is represented on my preview. At this point, I can hit the save up in the corner here to save my material. And I can X out of this, and you can now see down at the bottom here that first material now reflects the color you chose. So let's take a look at an object here. So if I'm working with my sphere, for instance, I have a couple of options of how I can work with this. First, I can just drag and drop. However, notice what happens when you do that. You see how only the one triangle for the sphere was colored. This can often be a misconception for folks because then what begins to happen is people will then go in, and I'll see students where they'll start clicking, dragging, and dropping, trying to place the colors and color in their shapes, so to speak. So I'm going to Control Z and step backwards here. When you're working with the geometry will actually allow you to select the individual faces here. If you want to select the entirety of the geometry, if you do the Shift key plus B as in boy key, it will select your entire object. At that point, I can click, drag, and drop my material onto my object. Another option that you can do, let me go ahead, I'll make one more material just so we have a different color here. So I'll call this second material. I'll go ahead, bring my vector in, connect. Maybe we'll do a lighter color here. We'll save and we'll X out. So maybe if I want to come over here to my cylinder, I use Shift B again. Another way that you can apply a material to an object is by coming over to the Details panel. Under the Surface Material where it says Element 0, I can actually click on the drop down here, and it will show me all current materials in my project here. So if I come all the way down and look for second in the listing here, you can see now how I've applied my material. So this is the basic way as far as working with the texture, but also applying different materials and giving you a starting point for adding different elements into your Unreal projects.